This is what I think about a lot. I look at digital capability largely being huge, amazing things that are possible. And yet, just to lay the background here, when I go to these conferences like the MIT Initiative of the Digital Economy, and I watch economists talk about why haven't we seen a significant impact on the gross domestic product of the country yet? So much capability and such little financial impact. Yes, there's a lot of news stories. Yes, there's a lot of capability that's talked about, but really to make an impact on the country, we've yet to see that. And so having worked in a large traditional company, I started to think about, well, why is this? And again, another IDE conference, a roundtable, a number of speakers say things like, well, traditional companies need to be bolder, they need to take bets, and they need to make some mistakes. And to me, I'll use an analogy here. It's a little bit like telling someone to lose weight, because telling them to eat less and exercise more, everyone knows that. That's not the hard part. The hard part is actually doing it. And going back to this statement, I think companies do know they need to be bolder. They do know they need to take bets. They do know they need to make mistakes. Something is stopping them doing this, right? So what is that? And at this point, you may say, well, why would we have large companies wanting to sort of undergo a digital transformation? And I'm trying to depict on the left there that big companies have a huge amount of assets. They have factories, they have people, they have large R&D budgets. They have an incentive to innovate. And yet it's hard, right? So moving from that left picture to the right picture, it's very tempting to say, well, all you have to do is produce this digital product. The solution may not be physical. That actually has a tremendous advantage if you think about it. We don't have to manufacture it. We can scale it more easily. We're not limited to raw material supply. We can distribute it more easily. We're not limited to distribution channels. And we actually have a smaller environmental footprint because we're not consuming stuff and that stuff doesn't get thrown away. On top of that, when we start working with cloud service providers like AWS and Microsoft, they are very, very capable and more than willing to help us. And so again, why isn't this an easy transformation? So I think, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I think these four tend to hit what I've experienced as being the biggest issues. First of all, the senior leadership, and you have to get senior leadership involved. If you think about how they became senior in the company, it was because they were the most invested in the old way of doing things. And so now asking people who've gotten to where they are through an old way of doing things, now to flip into a completely new way of doing things, that's very difficult. It's almost analogous to someone cutting off the branch they're sitting on, right? So it's going to be difficult for them to do that. I'm reminded of a story, actually. One of the senior VPs, we were chatting about a digital business model, and it was based on another product. Actually, the product would have been self-sufficient financially on its own, and I was suggesting using the data to create a service for a completely different set of customers. And he said, "I'm not sure that'll work." And the funny thing was, I completely agreed with him. I wasn't sure it would work either. But to him, that was a reason not to do it. To me, that was a reason to try it. And I think this kind of reticence is very prevalent in large companies and something you absolutely need to be aware of. I have a potential solution coming up, but something you've got to be aware of. So next one over. Again, companies, particularly materials companies like the one I worked for, they're very used to a certain investment profile, relatively modest at the beginning, much more investment required when we're manufacturing something. And so that small at the beginning, large at the end, matches actually the confidence you get when you start to scale a product. You gain confidence as you do it, and therefore the investment actually matches the confidence. With a digital product, you have to invest earlier, and that represents a bigger risk to many companies. How do you know that'll work? That's the question that keeps popping up. It is, next one over, it is super hard to hire, lead, motivate, and retain digital talent in a company that it doesn't have a obvious digital brand. typically we have to hire these folks at a high skill level. We have to compensate them perhaps more than a traditional industrial chemist. That's difficult for HR to deal with. When we try and promote these folks, they don't have the same kind of track record in the company than that sort of, let's say, more traditional industrial chemists have. It's tough, and you almost need to attack the HR problem first, to be honest. Are we going to really create an environment which is going to motivate and attract people and keep them? Very hard to do, and our turnover rates were always quite high because of that. And lastly, this is a really intriguing one. In my experience, digital solutions tend to actually be applied to the wrong problems. They actually apply to obvious problems, but the problems don't actually have the biggest value. It's a strange thing, and I'll walk through an example.